Hello, y'all. Today we're going to talk about self-control. Self-control is a very, very cool topic. I got roped into self-control kind of by accident. What happened was when I moved out to New York, I was supposed to work with a guy, Dave Cross, and in the summer before I was supposed to start my PhD program, I got a chance to work with Howie Racklin. He was out there, and he had some money to pay me in the summer before I was going to start, so I wanted to get out to New York and get my feet wet. Well, I impressed Howie Rackman so much in that summer before I started my PhD program. He says, "Hey, why don't you come into my lab?" And I'm like, let's see. Dave Cross is a lovely guy, but he ain't got no money. Howie Rackman has, I mean, we had at least, let's see, every single year we had to spend 300,000. Yeah, we had to spend it. And we were just like, what are we going to spend it on? All right. So it was very cool. And Howie Rackman was studying self-control. So I studied self-control. Okay, so let's quick make this idea about self-control. Most decisions that we make are ultimately between two things. I mean, I know it's a little more complicated, but really two things. We choose between the easy thing and the hard thing. Okay, maybe a fun thing and a not so fun thing. But easy versus hard. Heck, sometimes it's legal versus illegal, right? Come on, let's be honest here. And so what happens is every choice we make have consequences. Some of the consequences of the choices we make are in fact immediate, and some of them are delayed in time. So a self-controlled decision is one that we make in which the consequences at the moment are less desirable, but which consequences in the long run are better. So as a simple example, when the alarm rings in the morning and you're like, okay, I can either A, get out of bed, or B, hit the snooze button. Okay? Hitting the snooze button feels better right now, but that makes you late for class, that affects your grades, etc. Getting out of bed at this moment does not feel good at this moment, but tends to lead to getting to class on time, improved performance, and grades. So clearly, it's a powerful idea. In order to understand self-control, we need to think about the self as existing in time, as we did in I think, presentation 2-1, I'm not positive, but if we think about the self as existing at multiple points in time, then we can redefine this notion. We talk about my past self, my present self, and future self. And with self-control, what happens is your present self has to sacrifice, so that your future self will get a benefit. Okay? And it's pretty powerful, this notion, because I'm going to come back at the end and tie this together to social cooperation. But at this point, your present self needs to sacrifice so that your future self will have some benefit. I love it. Okay? So, as a term that's larger, self-control could also incorporate self-regulation, because the choices you make are not just these obvious choices such as hitting the snooze button or getting out of bed, but they're also things like in the face of distractions to keep concentrated. When an emotion that is inappropriate for the context comes to the surface, sucking it back down. I mean, it's regulating the self. Well, I'm going to pull out one of the most Sigmund Freud for a moment. All right, whatever. He makes a good model for it. So, according to Freudian theory, when a child is born, their personality is composed of just one thing, the id, right? The unconscious desires, the gimme, gimme, gimme. All right, something like that. And so what happens is, as a child interacts with society, they learn that the id's impulsive desires cannot always be gratified immediately, because the world does in fact put some checks on that. Okay? And so what happens is the ego eventually develops as the second part of the personality, and the ego's job, is to put the brakes on the impulsive nature of the id, right? So the ego's job is, I know you're hungry, I know you want it, but you need to wait, because the reality is this is not the right time for it. Okay? And so the ego allows us to put the brakes on the id's impulsive desires. Well, I'm going to take this little idea and make it one step further. Eventually, through interaction with society, Perhaps you know the final form of the personality to emerge is the superego. And the superego, as you know, is like an internalized ideals or a morality or something of this nature. But ultimately, what the superego does is it puts a check on the id's selfish desires. Okay? So the id is both selfish and impulsive. The ego checks the impulses, the superego checks the selfish. Okay? So now, this is pretty interesting. Like I said, we can demonstrate self-regulation by literal external behaviors like saying no to dessert, but also, when we control emotions, bite our tongue, eliminate distractions. Okay? So it's a powerful thing right here, and I'm already starting to tie together self-control and social cooperation. Okay? You've got the key here is that the ego allows for self-control, the superego allows for social cooperation. Okay? So in order to make this happen, this regulation of the self, okay, this self-regulation does not come cheap. It is not an inexpensive thing. In fact, Roy Baumeister, refers to this as willpower. Willpower is like a cognitive resource, an actual tank of gas or something, right? And so the analogy is that willpower is like a muscle, right? The more we exercise, the stronger it gets, okay? So the more you as a parent, your job is to teach your children willpower through practice. I know, Johnny, you want that candy bar, but how about this? We'll get the candy bar and then we'll eat it after dinner tonight. Okay, you get it? So you're forcing Johnny to practice this exercise or strengthen this muscle. Well, also like a muscle, if you've just been using a muscle recently, it gets fatigued. Okay? And so if you've just been making lots of self-controlled choices, then guess what? You're going to start to get worse at them. So willpower requires energy. Okay? And so literally when the blood glucose is low, then self-regulation goes down. Now this is a controversial finding. I don't know. There's a lot of research articles, and almost every one of them has Roy Baumeister as an author. And they lay this stuff out, and they're like, oh yeah, you bring people into a research lab, tell them to come hungry, and one group you give them radishes, right? Radishes. Whatever. Radishes will raise your blood glucose. So they come in hungry, and one group gets to increase in their blood glucose, and then all participants are given a task of self-regulation, and the group that ate the radishes are significantly better. And it's like, wonderful. But you know what? People after Baumeister can't replicate this stuff. Any research article that doesn't have his name on it. So I'm not bad-mouthing Roy Baumeister, but there's an awful lot of people, including myself, that have not been able to replicate the things that he repeatedly shows. He's just like, oh yeah, you can deplete the willpower. Sometimes, by the way, willpower is referred to as ego strength, right? Going back to the Freudian model, if you have a strong ego, then you would be good at regulating the id, right? So, you can deplete the ego strength just by doing this and blah, 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 blah. Well, I found some of this. Fatigue and stress I found to lead to, I've had some experimental results clearly supporting the fatigue and stress part. But perhaps you've experienced this yourself. And there's an old phrase that says, do not go to the grocery store when you're hungry, right? Because you buy stupid stuff. In other words, your willpower is low because you're hungry, and that leads to bad decision making. There's some economists out there that have come up with a model to try to defeat this. And a similar notion to this idea of ego depletion is something that is referred to as decision fatigue. And the idea is every decision you make depletes from these resources. And so what happens is if you're making choices all day long, your willpower will be depleted, and therefore at some time when you really need to make a decision that really has an impact on your life, you'll make a bad choice. And so what they'll do is they'll set up a life of every single thing that is they just don't have a choice about it. And the biggest one I heard was every time I go to the menu, I open the menu, left side, third one down. Done. That's what I order. Okay? I do not waste all of my resources choosing between all of these different, because inevitably you're going to start to regret them, like regret theory from the last slides. Yeah, so I like this idea. This is a really cool idea, willpower. Okay? So how important is self-control? Here's a classic study Walter Mischel did. There was so many versions of this, so I'll give you a version of it that is easy to understand. So let's say that, in fact, yeah, I already even sort of told you this one in the first topic. So they put a marshmallow on a plate in front of a child. They tell the child, okay, I'm going to leave the room for a while, and here's the deal. There's a bell on the table. If you really can't resist eating that thing, you just ring the bell, and when I come back, you can just eat it. Okay? But if you can wait until I come back, I'll give you 2 marshmallows. Right? The actual study involved pretzels and marshmallows, and it's just easier to understand with 1 versus 2 marshmallows. The point being, the children are given this marshmallow in front of them and told, if you ring the bell, I'll come in immediately. You can just eat that whole marshmallow. Okay? But if you can resist until I come back, you get 2. Perfect. Okay? And so what they found when they followed it up, this is Walter Mischel if I didn't say it. In Mischel's experiment, children waited longer. Older children, obviously, and I'm not surprised by that. They were all were between like 4 and 5, but even in that range between 4 and 5, there was a lot of age differentiation. But this next one was shocking. Children that were richer could wait more. Whoa, what? Yeah, rich kids had a better ability to wait for a marshmallow. Whoa, that's powerful. And these other things, more socially responsible, smarter, more ambitious, not a shock. Okay, but that richer one is really frightening. Because here's what happens. He followed up on these children. He followed these up with 2 other authors, Shota and Rodriguez, and they found that the children that waited longer for a marshmallow when they were 4 to 5 years old ended up getting higher SAT scores. They were judged as more competent by their teachers, their high school teachers. And if you take this logical chain, high SAT scores predict college success. College success predicts good job. Good job predicts more money. And therefore, more money means richer children, and the cycle repeats itself. Didn't we say the richer children were the ones that were successful? Okay, and so the rich remain rich, if anything, become richer. Okay, and so this idea of self-control is powerful because no matter what way we define success in our lives, if you want to be financially successful, you have to say no thank you to the cheap clothing that you're tempted to buy. I know what they are. You know, if you want to be spiritually successful, you have to say I'm going to go to church rather than stay home and watch a football game. You know, so if you want to have a successful marriage, you know what you have to do? You have to be able to bite your tongue. I'm sorry, that's an important component of it. So no matter what kind of success you're looking for, this is a way to get there. So bringing it back around to social cooperation. So if the notion of self-control is sacrifice by our present self for the benefit of our future self, we can talk about social cooperation where, here's, say for example, an interesting example of social cooperation. You're at the grocery store, you loaded the groceries into your car, and now all of a sudden you got the cart in your hands, and you're looking around, and it's raining, and it's like, where is the cart corral? I can't find it. I can't find it. Oh my God, there it is. And you're like, holy moly, I got to walk all that way in the rain and then walk back. Do I do it? So clearly, in order to be successful at this task, your present self needs to sacrifice. Yeah, that makes sense. Present self sacrifice. And so what we find, though, is that it's not your future self that benefits, but instead some collective group benefits. Okay? Now, what we find is that people that are good at self-control tend to also be good at social cooperation. I've done a ton of research showing that for all practical purposes, self-control and social cooperation fall right on top of each other. They are synonymous. There is a single factor, a regulatory factor, which defines all self-control and social cooperation. And that shouldn't surprise us because that cognitive resource called willpower, which is really how much is my present self able to sacrifice, since present self-sacrifice is the way that we achieve self-control and present self-sacrifice is how we achieve social cooperation, why wouldn't present self-sacrifice draw from the same cognitive resources in both tasks? And it does. It most certainly appears to. So one final connection between self-control and social cooperation that I found pretty powerful as part of a study I did in my dissertation was I had pairs of participants, and they played a game of social cooperation with each other. It was actually Prisoner's Dilemma, and we'll get back to it in chapter or topic 14, I think. But they were playing a game back and forth, and at the end we were like, what predicted cooperation with each other? What was the thing? And the only thing we found was this simple question that we asked at the end, which was, how well do you know the person across from you? And it was pretty powerful. The better they knew them, because there's no talking during these things, okay? Complete silence. But the better that they knew the person that they were playing this game with, the more that they cooperated, or more specifically, the more they were willing to sacrifice. And so, given this finding, a conclusion I drew at that point, and I stand firm by it, is that social cooperation requires trust. Okay? If you don't trust that somebody else is going to sacrifice for you in return, why would you sacrifice for them? Okay? So it's a game of trust. But the act of self-control is also a game of trust. Okay? If I do not trust that my future self will also sacrifice, why should my present self sacrifice? Okay? And so we connect self-control and social cooperation in multiple different ways, and it all ties back to the single cognitive resource called willpower. All right, so that's what I got for topic 2 this week. So we'll come see you again soon for topic 4 or 3. Topic 3.